Is there anything more frustrating than being asked to fix a bad recording? Okay, so this is a continuation of last week's video, so if you haven't seen that yet, I highly recommend watching that one first. I'll put a link on the screen here so you guys can check out that video if you haven't already. With that said, last week we talked about keeping in mind your gear, acoustic environment, and power source. We also talked about pre-fader metering and making sure that you're monitoring your input from your preamp correctly. Then we discussed clipping and distortion in a little more detail. So if you haven't watched that video yet or you want a refresher on any of those topics, then check that out. But now that that's out of the way and you know what you need to know to start setting levels, let's jump right back into it and start talking about setting levels. When a professional engineer runs a sound check in the studio, a lot of what we are doing is setting levels. We also are often listening to the sound quality and maybe adjusting what outboard gear we are using, including, for example, preamps, compressors, and EQs that we might have in the signal chain before the signal even enters our DAW. Besides adjusting what we are using, we are also adjusting the settings in our outboard gear. Besides that, though, much of sound check is ensuring that our levels are set properly, and that's our topic for today. So let's get into that and not get too distracted. You'll first want to find the gain settings for your preamp. This could be something like a mic gain knob on your interface, or it could be a distinct gain knob on a separate preamp from your interface. It could also be something like a setting within an OS if you're using something like an all-in-one recording device like a Zoom recorder. So figure out how to adjust the gain on your preamp and know that when you're adjusting that gain setting, you're actually adjusting how much your preamp boosts that signal that's coming in from your microphone. Microphones actually come in at a pretty low level, so we boost them with preamps. And actually, I think some prosumer tier microphones have a preamp built into the actual microphone. I think Blue microphones might have models like this, but let me know if that's right in the comments below. So anyway, your gain knob might actually be on the microphone itself. So once you know how to adjust your gain, you're going to run a sound check with your talent and follow these rules. So on the surface, it's not that complex. You'll want to find a sort of Goldilocks zone. Not too loud, but not too quiet. On the too quiet side of things, it's important not to set your gain so that your signal is coming in too low. You should be able to see those meters bouncing up and down significantly. If your levels are too low, you'll have a bad signal to noise ratio. And what that means is if that later, during mixing, you want to increase the levels on your recorded audio to get a more industry standard loudness level, that you'll get a lot of noise in your recording. This is because when you boost the levels on already recorded audio, you're boosting both the wanted signal and the underlying, often unwanted noise. If that wanted signal is down low, close to the noise floor, then you'll have trouble boosting that wanted signal without boosting the noise as well. And you might find that you'll have a very staticky sounding background noise. Noise also tends to be fairly broad spectrum in terms of frequencies, so it can be difficult to get out later. To avoid a bad signal to noise ratio, a lot of people will recommend getting your levels as loud as you can without clipping. And you might notice over time that guys that worked in analog might be more serious about this, saying you have to get it as loud as possible while tracking. But analog systems introduced a lot more noise than digital. Tape has a lot of noise on it naturally, whereas a clean digital system introduces almost no noise beyond room noise. So being careful about your signal to noise ratio is a bit more of a concern for analog recordings than it is for digital. So you do have a bit more leeway when tracking digitally. Now, I'll see if I can throw a screen capture up here on the screen to show you what this might look like in Pro Tools. Basically, in Pro Tools, you might ideally want to see, as the meters jump up and down, that a lot of the quiet parts are filling all or most of the dark green bottom section of the meter. And you'll also want the louder parts to be hitting the orange top section of the meter. Just keep in mind that this is a real fast and loose generalization. The dynamic range of whatever you're tracking will affect this, of course. And I've also seen very accomplished engineers not worry too much about getting the louder parts up towards the top of the meter, since they know they're going to mix the track into the rest of the project at a fairly low level anyway. But anyway, if your audio is bouncing around in the middle section of your meter, bouncing around the light green section, then you're probably in a pretty good place. Once you think you're at a pretty good level, you'll want to ensure that you're not likely to clip during the performance. So what I always do is I ask the talent to perform the loudest part of their performance. I then make sure there's no clipping registering or audible distortion. If there's clipping, I then reduce the gain of my preamp, clear the clip light indicator, and then if it's not too much of a strain on the performer, I'll ask them to perform that loud part again. And a trick that I actually started doing back when I was doing live sound is that I usually set the levels a bit lower than I think I have to set them to avoid clipping. This might seem logical since it gives you a bit more of a buffer so you're a bit less likely to clip, but I also do it because people often perform just a bit louder when they're doing the real performance versus when they're doing sound check. Now this might be a bit more of a pronounced effect when people are doing a live performance, but they still do it a bit in the studio, so I set the levels a smidge lower than I think, no matter where I am. I think it has to do with the psychology of the performance versus the sound check. People's adrenaline kicks in or whatever. But anyway, it's also a great reason why the performer in an ideal world should warm up a bit even before the sound check. So that's basically it. If you've avoided clipping and set everything upright and you're still hearing some distortion, your performer might be distorting the actual microphone. And that's because depending on the SPLs of the actual performance and the sensitivity of your microphone, you can distort the actual microphone. So if you think you might be experiencing this type of distortion, you can try to move the sound source away from the microphone a bit to decrease the amount of pressure on the microphone diaphragm, or you can try swapping out the microphone for a more hardy one. So go out and enjoy the tracking process. Just remember that once you switch to mixing, it's easier to bring up the levels on a track that's slightly too quiet, but it's very, very hard to fix distortion from clipping that's on your original audio. So it's a safe bet to err on the side of a little too quiet than a little too loud with your levels. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that you probably want to avoid adjusting your preamp's gain in the middle of recording an actual performance. So take the time to do a sound check. If you cut corners, you'll probably regret it. Changing the gain on your preamp adjusts the sound, and you'll be able to hear the difference in the recording from before you adjusted it to after you adjusted it. And that can be jarring and weird sounding. So that's it for now. For a detailed written guide on setting your gain for recording, you can become a patron through my Patreon. The link to my Patreon is in the description below, and patrons get access to a bunch of extra materials that are on my website, catonoise.com, including downloadable PDF guides. I hope you guys liked this video, and please let me know what you think in the comments below. For today's question, I want to know, what are some of your favorite tips and tricks for tracking? Please leave your answers in the comments below. So thanks guys. As usual, if you like this video, please watch my other videos, like and subscribe. I'll be coming out with new videos every other Wednesday, and thanks for watching. Okay. My chair is getting pretty squeaky. I'm gonna have to fix that. Now it's not squeaking. What the F? Squeaking this whole time I was recording, and now when I finally want to talk about it squeaking, it won't squeak. I'm gonna go eat a bunch of food.